The shouting started before the door fully opened. "Explain this!" The words cut through the quiet mansion like something sharp and irreversible, the kind of sound that, once heard, changes the temperature of every room it travels through. Min-jae barely had time to look up from his phone before something flew across the room and landed on the bed in front of him. He stared at it. Silk. Black lace. Small. Delicate. The kind of thing designed to be noticed. Very clearly not his. He set his phone down slowly. Across the room, Yura stood near the doorway, chest rising and falling fast, her eyes burning with the specific fury of someone who had been humiliated and hadn't yet decided what to do with that feeling. The morning light came through the tall windows and lit everything gold, but there was nothing warm about the moment. The mansion, usually so controlled, so precisely quiet, felt like it was holding its breath. Min-jae looked at the lace on the bed. Then he looked at her. "Yura, what is this?" Her laugh came out sharp, disbelieving. "What is it?" She repeated, her voice climbing. "You're asking me what it is?" She pointed toward the bed. Her hand was shaking. "That was inside your wardrobe, hidden between your shirts like some kind of secret someone almost got away with." Min-jae frowned. He looked again at the black lace lying against his white sheets, delicate, expensive, the kind of thing that costs more than most people spend on a week of groceries. He had never seen it before. He was certain of that. "I've never seen that," he said calmly. Yura stared at him like she had just heard the most perfectly constructed lie in the world. "You expect me to believe that? I'm telling the truth. So it just appeared there? Between your shirts? By itself? I don't know how it got there." "Oh, you don't know." She crossed her arms tightly across her chest. "A piece of women's lingerie is sitting in your wardrobe, tucked between your clothes, and you don't know how it got there." Min-jae rubbed his temples slowly. The day had barely started. He hadn't had coffee, and already he was standing in the middle of something he didn't understand, being interrogated for something he hadn't done. "Yura," he said carefully, "why would I hide something like that in my own wardrobe?" "Because you're cheating." The accusation fell between them with a weight that silence couldn't absorb quickly enough. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The word just sat there in the middle of the room. Min-jae's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" "Yes." "Then explain the lingerie." "I just told you I can't." "Because there is no explanation. Because the explanation is exactly what it looks like, and you're standing there hoping I'm stupid enough to accept whatever story you're about to invent." "I'm not inventing anything," he said, frustration beginning to sharpen his voice at the edges. "I am telling you, clearly, that I have never seen that before." "Then whose is it, Min-jae?" Her voice echoed against the high ceilings. The mansion absorbed it, sent it back softer, and the room went quiet again. But the question still hung in the air unanswered, because Min-jae genuinely had no answer. And that was the problem. Because standing there looking honestly baffled was somehow more infuriating than guilt would have been. Guilt she could have worked with. This confused, patient, unshakable calm made her feel like she was losing her mind. "Another woman has been in this house." Her voice broke slightly on the words, not from weakness, but from the specific shame of knowing that the staff had heard every second of this. "Inside the house we're supposed to share. No one has been here. The evidence is right there. I don't care what it looks like. I'm telling you the truth." She grabbed her purse from the chair near the door. "I need air. Running away won't." "I am not running away." She turned back to face him, and her eyes were bright now, not with tears, but with something harder. "I am trying not to scream in a house full of staff who are probably already whispering about this. So I am giving myself 30 minutes before I say something I'll regret." She turned and walked toward the door. Min-jae didn't stop her. He stood near the bed, looking at the black lace, and for the first time in the argument, something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, not shame, something closer to genuine unease. Because no matter how absurd the accusation, the evidence was there. Something had been placed in his wardrobe, and he had absolutely no explanation for how. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the explanation was currently standing in the hallway. Frozen, pressing a laundry basket against her chest with both hands. Bridget. She had come upstairs to place Min-jae's freshly laundered shirts in the wardrobe, the same shirts, the same precise organization she performed every Tuesday and Friday morning. She had come upstairs exactly as she always did, quiet and efficient, and she had stopped in the hallway the moment the shouting started. Now she stood with her back against the wall just outside the bedroom door, knuckles white around the plastic handles of the basket, listening to every word, every accusation, every denial. Her heart was pounding so loudly in her ears that she was genuinely afraid someone inside the room might hear it. Inside, Yura's voice sharpened again. You made me look like a fool, Min-jae. In front of everyone in this house. I didn't do anything. You embarrassed me. I didn't do anything. The door swung open. Bridget reacted on instinct. She moved fast, stepping backward around the corner just as Yura's heels struck the marble floor of the hallway. She pressed herself against the wall, basket tight against her body, and held her breath. Yura's footsteps passed her without slowing. Click, click, click. Down the hallway, toward the staircase, sharp and furious. Bridget exhaled slowly against the wall. Behind her, through the open bedroom door, she could hear Min-jae. The sound of him moving. Then silence. He was still in there, standing near the bed, she imagined, staring at the black lace on his white sheets and trying to understand something that would never make sense to him. Because it had been put there deliberately, quietly, carefully, by her. Bridget stood in the hallway for a long moment and let that settle over her like cold water. The argument had worked exactly as she predicted it would, the suspicion, the accusation, the crack forming between them. She had imagined this moment for days, rehearsed it in her mind every night in her staff quarters, told herself it was the right thing, told herself it was justice, told herself that exposing the truth was worth whatever discomfort followed. But standing here now, in the actual hallway, with the actual sound of that argument still ringing in the air, it felt different from how she'd imagined it. Heavier, more real. She looked down at the laundry basket in her hands. Min-jae's shirts, neatly pressed, waiting to go into the same wardrobe where she had hidden a piece of black lace 2 days ago. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them, straightened her back, and walked in the opposite direction. Back to work. Back to being invisible. Because that was what she was in this house. To understand why a quiet African woman would risk everything, her job, her reputation, her entire sense of herself, to destroy a billionaire's engagement, you have to go back to the beginning. Before the argument, before the lace, before the decision that set everything in motion. You have to go back to the first morning Bridget Odom walked through the iron gates of Min-jae's mansion, and the slow, quiet moment she first began to fall. The estate sat at the edge of Seoul, hidden behind tall iron gates and long rows of trees that kept the city at a polite distance. From the outside it looked less like a home and more like something designed to appear in architecture magazines. Glass walls, polished stone, balconies that overlooked manicured gardens that were never less than perfect. Inside, everything was precise. Every surface reflected light. Every room existed in the kind of quiet that only very expensive spaces ever truly achieve. Bridget arrived before sunrise every morning. She was 28 years old, Nigerian-born, and had been working in private households in Seoul for 3 years by the time she came to work for Min-jae. She was efficient, unobtrusive, and extraordinarily good at the specific skill required of people in her position, the ability to move through a space without disturbing it. She dusted glass tables and wiped marble counters and pushed her cleaning cart through hallways that stretched longer than most streets she'd grown up on. She worked without complaint, without drawing attention, without giving anyone a reason to remember she was there. That was, in wealthy households, considered a virtue. Min-jae barely registered her existence for the first 2 months. He was a 35-year-old man whose company operated across 4 countries, whose schedule existed somewhere between boardrooms and international airports and late-night calls that bled into early mornings. He was the kind of man for whom an enormous staff existed specifically so that the details of daily life never required his attention. Food appeared, clothes were cleaned and returned. The house maintained itself, as far as he was concerned. People like Bridget occupied the useful, invisible machinery of his world. Necessary, unseen, interchangeable. Bridget understood that. She had worked in wealthy homes before, some coldly indifferent, some actively unpleasant. She had been spoken to as though she were furniture. She had been spoken to as though she were a child. She had learned, early on, to calibrate her expectations downward and focus on the work. But Min-jae was different in a small way that turned out not to be small at all. He said thank you. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in the performative way that wealthy people sometimes do when they want staff to feel appreciated without actually treating them differently. Just quietly, as though it were natural, the way you might thank someone who held a door open. Once, early in her third week, Bridget was dusting a shelf in the main corridor when she bumped the cart into a side table, sending a small decorative sculpture toward the edge. She grabbed for it and missed. Her stomach dropped. She braced for the sharp words that would follow. Min-jae happened to be passing. He reached out calmly, caught the sculpture before it could fall, placed it back on the table, and said simply, "Careful." Then he continued walking. No anger, no lecture, no visible irritation. Just one word and a steady hand, and then he was gone. Bridget stood there for a moment after he left, surprised by how surprised she was. It was such a small thing, and yet it stayed in her mind for the rest of the day. She began noticing him the way you sometimes notice the weather, gradually, without realizing you're paying attention. The way he moved through the house without ever seeming rushed, even when his schedule clearly demanded it. The way he stood at the tall windows each morning with a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, perfectly still for a few minutes before the day swallowed him. The way his voice stayed, even during phone calls she wasn't supposed to hear, even when the conversations were clearly difficult. She never stared. She was too professional for that, and too afraid of what it might mean if she did. But she noticed. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. Bridget entered the master bedroom exactly as she always did, quietly, efficiently, with the practiced invisibility of someone who has made it their purpose to not exist. She had checked the schedule. Min-jae had an 8 a.m. departure for a meeting in Gangnam. It was 8:45. He was long gone. She began at the windows, drawing back the curtains to let in the light. Then to the nightstands, clearing the water glass, straightening the lamp. Then toward the wardrobe area to organize the clothes. The bathroom door opened. Min-jae stepped out. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. He was wrapped in a white towel sitting low on his waist, his hair still darkened with water from the shower, his face carrying the unhurried expression of a man who had no idea anyone else was in the room. Bridget turned away immediately. She could feel heat climbing into her face, and she was mortified by it. "I'm so sorry. I believed you'd already left. The schedule said 8 o'clock. "It's fine." His voice was calm. No irritation. Just mild surprise, the kind that fades in seconds. "I thought everyone was working downstairs," he said. "I'll come back," Bridget said quickly, her eyes fixed on the wall. "No, don't." She heard him move toward the wardrobe. "You can continue." She stayed turned away, focusing on the curtain she was adjusting, willing the warmth in her face to disappear. Behind her, she heard the soft sounds of him dressing, the wardrobe sliding open, the quiet rustle of fabric. She kept her eyes forward, but for that 1 second, before she turned, she'd seen him. Not in any way she intended, just a glimpse, but enough to imprint itself on her mind with the stubborn clarity of things you didn't choose to notice, the ease in how he moved, the complete lack of self-consciousness, the unhurried confidence of a man entirely comfortable in his own body. No performance, no awareness of being seen, just himself. A few minutes later, she heard him finish dressing, heard his footsteps cross the room, heard the door close behind him. She turned back slowly. The room was empty. She stood beside the wardrobe for longer than necessary, her hand resting on the edge of it, her heart still doing something it had no business doing. She told herself it was embarrassment. She told herself it was the shock of the unexpected. She told herself it meant nothing at all. And for a few days, she almost believed that. But the image stayed. Not shamefully. There was nothing shameful about it, really. It was more the feeling of the moment that refused to leave. The way distance between them had briefly collapsed. They had occupied the same room not as employer and employee, not as billionaire and cleaner, just as two people who had accidentally crossed paths in an unguarded moment. He had been human in a way she hadn't fully allowed herself to see before. And something in her, quietly and without permission, responded to that. The thing about feelings you refuse to acknowledge is that they find other ways to exist. Bridget spent a great deal of time in the laundry room. It was located in the lower floor of the house, away from the main living areas. A long, utilitarian space lined with washing machines and deep shelves stacked with folded linens and towels. It was warm in there. It smelled of clean fabric and detergent. It was, she had always felt, one of the few spaces in the mansion that belonged entirely to the people who worked there. She handled Min Jae's clothes with particular care. His suits required specific cleaning processes. His shirts needed precise ironing, collar first, then sleeves, then body, each crease deliberate. She had learned his preferences without being told, the way good staff always do. But something had changed. She noticed it herself, and it embarrassed her. When she folded his shirts now, she sometimes paused. Just for a second, her fingers resting on the fabric. The faint trace of his cologne in the cloth, subtle, clean, expensive, would reach her before she could stop it, and something in her chest would do a small, quiet, entirely involuntary thing. She never lingered long. She never let herself. She reminded herself, frequently, of the things she knew to be true. Men like Min Jae did not fall in love with their cleaners. That was not how the world worked. Not his world, not the one she existed inside. He would marry someone from a similar background, similar culture, similar tax bracket. A woman who attended charity galas in dresses that cost more than Bridget's monthly salary. A woman whose family name meant something. Not a 28-year-old Nigerian woman who ironed shirts in a basement room and counted herself lucky to have stable employment. She was not naive. She had never been naive. But feelings, as anyone who has ever tried to reason their way out of one will tell you, don't particularly care about logic. Then one evening, she was wiping the hallway floor near Min Jae's office, the door slightly open, light spilling out into the corridor, and she heard something that she hadn't been looking to hear, and that, once heard, could not be unheard. Min Jae was speaking with a colleague inside. The conversation had been drifting between business and the personal, the easy kind of talk that happens between two men who trust each other. "Your family's still asking about marriage," the colleague said. Min Jae laughed quietly. "Always. You're 35 and successful. They're probably panicking." "Something like that. You should date internationally," the colleague joked. "You travel enough." A short pause. Then Min Jae's voice, calm and entirely matter-of-fact. "My family expects me to marry a Korean woman. Anything else would cause problems." The colleague laughed. "Traditional expectations. It's easier that way," Min Jae said simply, as though it were an obvious truth, not worth debating. In the hallway, Bridget's hand stopped moving. She stared at the cloth in her hand. The corridor felt suddenly smaller. The sentence hung in the air above her head like something physical. Anything else would cause problems. She had known this, of course. She had always known this. She had reminded herself of it regularly, had used it as a kind of preventative measure against the feelings she was working so hard to not have. But knowing a thing in the abstract and hearing it spoken aloud in the specific, casual tone of settled fact, those are two entirely different experiences. Hearing it spoken was like having a door you'd left slightly open firmly, finally closed. She resumed cleaning. Slower. The conversation inside the office moved on to quarterly projections. Normal things. Important things. Bridget finished the corridor and moved to the next task. She told herself this was fine, that it was better to know, that she hadn't genuinely believed anything would happen, so nothing had been lost. She was almost convincing. And then, 2 weeks later, the black car rolled through the gates, and the woman inside it rendered every one of those careful rationalizations completely irrelevant. The staff knew before the car arrived. Word moved through a household the way it always does, quietly, quickly, from the drivers to the kitchen to the housekeepers to everyone else. By the time the black luxury car rolled through the iron gates on that cool October afternoon, every person in the mansion already knew what was coming. The fiancé. Bridget was in the upper corridor polishing a display cabinet when she heard the car doors below. She worked steadily, kept her eyes on the glass. She had told herself, during the 20 minutes between hearing the news and this moment, that it made no difference to her, that she would feel nothing, that she was, above all, a professional. She looked. The woman was beautiful. Not the kind of beauty that announces itself, the kind that sits quietly in how everything fits together. Elegant coat, in a pale camel color. Dark hair perfectly arranged over her shoulders. Heels that struck the marble with the confident precision of someone who had worn expensive shoes her entire life. She moved through the entrance hall with the unhurried awareness of a person who had always been the most significant presence in any room she entered. Min-jae made the introduction briefly, almost formally. "This is Yura. She will be staying here." Yura smiled. Gracious, composed, the kind of smile you practice until it becomes indistinguishable from the real thing. The head housekeeper stepped forward. The staff acknowledged her with quiet deference. Bridget lowered her eyes politely. But she watched. She watched the way Yura's gaze moved slowly around the entrance hall, not with the delight of someone encountering something beautiful for the first time, but with the deliberate assessment of someone calculating what they were acquiring. The artwork on the walls, the staircase, the light fixtures, everything measured, everything noted. Then Yura's eyes passed over Bridget. Half a second. Less. Then they moved on, as though Bridget were one of the display cabinets. Part of the inventory. Min-jae gestured toward the stairs. They moved upstairs together. The house returned to its routine, but something had permanently changed. Yura settled into the mansion easily, and the household reorganized itself around her without friction, which was, Bridget supposed, how it was designed to work. Her meals were prepared to her specifications. Her suite received fresh flowers each morning. Staff moved around her carefully, anticipating her preferences before she needed to voice them. She was, after all, the future mistress of the house. This was simply the beginning of a long relationship. In front of others, Yura was everything Min-jae could have wanted. She held his arm at dinners. She laughed at his jokes with a warmth that guests found charming. She spoke about him with quiet admiration in social situations. He works so hard, he's so dedicated, and allowed herself to be admired alongside him as part of a picture-perfect pair. Guests told them constantly that they were perfect together. Yura received this with gracious modesty. Min-jae seemed quietly pleased. Bridget watched this and said nothing, felt nothing she allowed herself to name. But she also saw the other version, the version that appeared when guests were gone and the performance was no longer required. That place again, when Min-jae suggested a restaurant he thought she liked. "You're always on your phone. You're so boring sometimes. You never want to do anything interesting." Delivered flatly, without visible cruelty, which somehow made them land harder. Min-jae absorbed all of it with his characteristic patience. He adjusted. He accommodated. He apologized for things that weren't his fault with the quiet generosity of a man who believed the person he was with deserved his best effort. It made Bridget's chest tight in a way she couldn't fully explain. Then one afternoon, passing the kitchen, she heard it. Yura's voice, low, warm in a register Bridget had never heard her use around Min-jae. I know. But my parents keep pushing this engagement." A pause. Listening. Then a soft laugh. "Of course he's rich. That's the entire point." Bridget stopped walking. The words settled into her slowly, each syllable landing with specific weight. A second later, Yura glanced toward the doorway and saw her. The warmth in her expression vanished as cleanly as a light being switched off. The polished mask returned instantly. "Is dinner ready?" "Yes, Mississippi." Yura ended the call and walked away without further acknowledgement. Bridget stood in the doorway and felt something harden in her chest. She doesn't love him. The thought arrived not as a suspicion but as a conclusion. She had been observing this woman for weeks. The private size, the public warmth, the calculated assessments, the overheard phone call. She had assembled the evidence piece by piece without consciously meaning to. And now the verdict was clear. Yura wasn't in this relationship. She was managing it. There is a specific, private kind of fury that comes from watching someone you care about being deceived, and that fury feels righteous because it has a target that isn't you. Bridget recognized it and told herself it was simply a matter of principle, of fairness, of Min-jae deserving better than this. She told herself it had nothing to do with her feelings. She almost believed it. The idea didn't arrive suddenly. It gathered itself slowly over 2 weeks of watching Yura's performance in front of guests, watching her indifference behind closed doors, watching Min-jae be patient with someone who viewed his patience as something to be used rather than appreciated. He deserves to know. And then, following closely on the heels of that thought, someone should show him. Bridget pushed it away the first time, and the second, but it kept returning with the steady persistence of something that believes in itself, and by the end of the second week, she had stopped pushing and started listening. On a gray Thursday evening after work, she found herself on a busy Seoul shopping street, bright storefronts, people moving fast, the city doing what it does, and she stopped in front of a small boutique. Behind the window, delicate silk and black lace arranged on mannequins. Elegant. Intentional. The kind of thing designed to communicate something specific. She went inside. She found it quickly. Black lace. Exactly the right weight of suggestion. The kind of item that, if discovered in the wrong place, would require no explanation because the explanation would be immediately obvious to anyone who found it. Would you like to try it on? No. I'll take it. She walked out into the cool evening air with a small bag and a heartbeat that was doing things it had no business doing. She told herself, this is about truth. If Yura trusts him, this goes nowhere. If she doesn't, what happens is on her. She knew it was more complicated than that. She knew it even then. But she had already made the decision before she walked into the shop. The shopping was just the confirmation. 2 days later, the mansion was quiet in the particular way it got on afternoons when both Min-jae and Yura were out. Min-jae at back-to-back meetings in the city. Yura shopping somewhere expensive with a friend. Most of the staff working in other areas of the house. Bridget was assigned to the master bedroom. She entered exactly as she always did. Dusted. Straightened. Moved through the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. When she reached the wardrobe, she stood in front of it for a moment longer than usual. She reached into the pocket of her cleaning apron. Her fingers found the fabric. For 3 seconds, she counted them. She stood there and let doubt have its full say. This is wrong. This will destroy something. You will lose your job. You could lose everything. Then another voice, quieter but more certain. He is being deceived inside his own home. He deserves the truth. She slipped the lace between 2 of Min-jae's folded shirts. Not buried completely. Not placed where it would never be found. Placed with the deliberate precision of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Visible enough that a searching hand would find it. Placed with enough apparent care to suggest it had been hidden there on purpose. She closed the wardrobe. She continued cleaning. Her hands were perfectly steady. That surprised her. The wait was 3 days. Then came the shouting. The argument worked exactly as she had architected it. But the reality of it, standing in that hallway, listening to real pain and real voices, felt nothing like she had imagined. She had imagined something more abstract. A confrontation between 2 people she observed from a careful distance, in which truth emerged like light through a crack. Clean. Justified. What she heard instead was the specific sound of humiliation. Min-jae's controlled frustration. Yura's sharp, wounded pride. The genuine, bewildered hurt underneath both their voices. Bridget stood against the wall and felt something shift in her chest. Not regret, not quite, but something that looked at regret from very close range. She pushed it down. She had come too far to pull back now, and besides, the larger truth remained. Yura was deceiving him. The lace had been Bridget's lie, yes, but the deception it was pointing toward was entirely real. Wasn't it? 2 days after the argument, she got her answer. Yura began behaving differently. Phone calls that ended mid-sentence when staff approached. Late evenings with explanations thin enough to see through. Text messages that made her smile in the private way people smile at messages they don't intend anyone to see. Then one afternoon, close enough to the kitchen doorway that she couldn't have missed it. Yura's voice, low and warm in a register that had nothing professional about it. I told you not to call me during the day. Pause. Yes. I miss you too. Bridget moved away before being seen. But her mind was already ahead of her body. So the lace had been a planted lie. But the lie had been pointing in the right direction all along. The seed she had planted to expose a performance had uncovered something real growing underneath it. Min-jae left for a 2-day trip on a Wednesday. That night, a car pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out. Well-dressed, unfamiliar, nothing like the business associates Bridget recognized. Yura met him at the door. Just a colleague, she told the security guard lightly. We have some things to discuss. The guard nodded. The man walked inside. Bridget watched from the kitchen doorway and felt the wrongness of it immediately, the ease between them, the familiarity that sat too close to the surface, the way Yura touched his arm briefly as she led him toward the stairs. Hours passed. The house went quiet. Staff retired. Close to midnight, Bridget moved carefully down the upper hallway. She heard it before she reached the door. Low laughter. A man's voice close. Then Yura's. Intimate, unhurried, The voice of someone who has been waiting all evening and is no longer pretending otherwise. Bridget stood in the hallway and felt something settle in her chest. Heavy. Final. She came back the next night with her phone. Her hands were shaking when she pressed record, but she pressed it. Whispered conversations. The closeness between them. The sounds of a relationship that had been going on for some time, comfortable enough to bring itself openly into someone else's home. When she lowered the phone, the recording was clear. Undeniable. She followed Yura 2 days later, taxi chasing taxi through Seoul's afternoon traffic, to a hotel with a marble entrance and uniformed staff. She waited in the lobby near a decorative display and watched Yura's face change the moment a man appeared across the room. Not the same man as before. A different one. But the smile Yura gave him, open, warm, real in a way her smiles around Min-jae had never been, told the entire story. Bridget raised her phone. Standing outside the hotel afterward in the cold Seoul wind, the footage safe on her phone, one thought arrived with the quiet certainty of something that has always been true. Yura isn't just cheating. She's living an entirely different life. That night, alone in her staff quarters, Bridget typed a single sentence. You deserve to know the truth. No name. No explanation. Just the videos attached to a message sent from a number Min-jae wouldn't recognize. She pressed send before she could stop herself. Then she lay in the dark and waited for the world to change. Min-jae returned from his trip early. His car came through the gates just after noon the next day, and Bridget, who happened to be in the garden corridor when it arrived, watched him step out. His face was the same as always, composed, unhurried, but something behind his eyes was different, darker. The expression of a man carrying something he hasn't yet decided what to do with. He walked into the house without speaking to anyone. The confrontation came that evening. Bridget was in the corridor outside the living room when it started, Yura's voice rising first, then Min-jae's, lower and more controlled, which made it somehow worse. She pressed herself to the wall and listened, because she had no other choice. Because this was the thing she had put in motion, and some part of her felt she was required to witness it. Who sent you this? It doesn't matter. It matters if someone is trying to destroy us. A pause. Then Min-jae's voice, stripped of patience for the first time Bridget had ever heard. How many of them? Silence. How many men, Yura? She heard Yura take a breath. Then, remarkably, her voice when it came was flat. Almost bored. The voice of someone who has decided that the performance is no longer worth maintaining. I never loved you, Min-jae. The mansion went still. Our families arranged this because it made financial sense. Your company gains connections. My family gains influence. I thought that was understood. And the men. They're personal. They have nothing to do with this arrangement. The silence that followed had a different quality from all the silences that had come before it. Something final settling into place. Pack your things, Min-jae said quietly. You're serious. I'm ending it because it was never real. Yura considered this. Then, fine. Her heels were steady on the staircase. Unhurried, as though the end of an engagement was a minor inconvenience, easily absorbed, already being filed away under lessons learned about managing expectations. Min-jae remained in the living room. In the corridor, Bridget stood with her back against the wall and felt the weight of everything she had set in motion pressing down on her chest. The truth had emerged. The deception had been exposed. The engagement was over. She had wanted this. So why did victory feel like standing over something broken? After Yura left, the house changed. Not in ways that were visible from the outside. The flowers still arrived, the meals were still prepared, the rooms were still maintained. But the atmosphere shifted in the way a room shifts when something that was generating warmth is removed from it. Min-jae worked. He always worked. But now he came home to a different kind of quiet, and the quiet seemed to cost him something. Bridget noticed it because she noticed everything. She had spent months making a careful, detailed study of this man, his rhythms, his moods, the specific quality of his silences. She knew the difference between the quiet of someone at peace and the quiet of someone carrying weight they haven't yet found a place to set down. Some evenings, she found him in the living room near the tall windows, the city lights of Seoul spread out below him, a glass of whiskey loose in his hand. Not drinking it, just holding it, just sitting. The confident, composed man she had spent months quietly admiring was still present, but with cracks in him now. Human cracks. The kind that come from being told by someone you trusted that what you thought was real was never real at all. Bridget cleaned around him on those evenings. Quietly, at a distance, giving him space while remaining present. One night, she was wiping the coffee table when he spoke. "You're still working this late?" She paused, turned slightly. "Yes, sir." He was watching her from the couch. His expression was tired but not unkind. "Get some rest, Bridget." She nodded, moved toward the door. But at the threshold she paused, almost without meaning to, and glanced back. He had already returned to the window, the glass of whiskey untouched. She walked down the corridor toward her quarters and told herself the tightness in her chest was nothing. Just the end of a long day. She didn't sleep for a long time. Something changed between them in the weeks that followed, and it happened so gradually that Bridget almost didn't notice it until it was already underway. She came to work differently. Not dramatically. She wasn't performing anything, or at least that's what she told herself. She simply made small adjustments, clothes that fit her properly rather than hanging loose. Her hair arranged with care instead of pulled back in the fastest possible way. She stood differently, more present, less determined to take up as little space as possible. She told herself it had nothing to do with him. One afternoon she was arranging flowers in the dining room, tall white blooms in a glass vase, her attention on the arrangement, when Min-jae walked in. Their eyes met. Something in his expression shifted. A slight recalibration. "You're new," he said. Bridget blinked. "No, sir." He frowned. "You've worked here before. For over a year." He studied her face for a moment, genuinely studying it, the way you look at something you've been looking past for a long time. Something almost like amusement crossed his features. "I must not have been paying attention." He held her gaze a moment longer than the situation required, then walked toward the kitchen. But after that, he started noticing her. Not loudly, not in ways that crossed any line. Just questions that arrived during quiet moments, delivered with the same measured calm he brought to everything. "How long have you been in Seoul?" "You're Nigerian. You work very quietly. Simple things. Professional, technically. But the frequency of them changed. The quality of his attention when she answered changed. Then one evening in the library. He was there when she arrived, leaning lightly against the shelves, a book in his hand that he wasn't reading, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows in the way he wore them at the end of long days. He didn't leave when she came in. He stayed. She began cleaning the desk near the window, hyper-aware of him in the way you become hyper-aware of someone when you've spent a long time trying not to be. "You have a very calm presence," he said. The words landed differently from anything he'd ever said to her before. Not professional. Not perfunctory. She looked up. He was watching her, not the way an employer watches staff. The way a person watches someone they have only recently, belatedly actually seen. With the specific focused attention of discovery. "Thank you, sir." "You don't need to keep saying sir," he said quietly. She had no response to that. He looked away first, cleared his throat lightly. "You may continue." But the air in the room had changed, and it didn't change back. After that, the tension between them built in the wordless way that genuine attraction always does. Not in grand gestures or declarations, but in small accumulating moments that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. Hands reaching for the same object. Fingers not quite touching, but close. Eyes meeting across a room and holding a second past coincidence. Him standing at a distance that was technically acceptable, but that both of them registered as deliberately chosen. Her finding reasons to be in rooms she didn't strictly need to be in, then catching herself doing it and feeling ashamed, then doing it again. None of it crossed a line. All of it was aware. And underneath every moment, sitting in the deepest part of her chest like a stone she couldn't stop feeling, the secret, the lace, the videos, the anonymous message, everything she had done, every thread she had pulled, every line she had crossed. The closer he moved, the heavier it became. Because she knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who has earned a very specific kind of dread, that the moment he discovered the truth was the moment everything between them would end. The night Bridget finally told him, it had been raining for hours. She was in the kitchen alone, finishing the last glass of the evening, when she heard his footsteps enter behind her. She didn't need to turn around. She knew his walk the way you know a song you've heard too many times, without meaning to have learned it, and unable to unknow it now. Min-jae leaned against the counter behind her. She could feel him watching her. He had been doing this more frequently, appearing in quiet rooms she occupied, staying without explanation. She had been trying to decide what it meant. She was almost afraid of what it meant. Bridget! His voice was different tonight. Lower. Stripped of the professional distance that usually sat between them even in their more personal conversations. Yes. I've been thinking. She kept her hands on the glass. Kept her back to him. After everything that happened, he said slowly, I've been thinking about who stayed. Most people. Staff. Friends. Business contacts. They gave me space. Which I understand. I didn't want company. A pause. But you stayed. She closed her eyes briefly. You never made it obvious. You never pushed. But you were always there. Every evening, some quiet corner of the house. And I noticed that eventually, he pushed off the counter. She heard him move closer, and every nerve in her body registered the diminishing distance. You're the only person in this house I trust. The glass nearly slipped from her hands. She turned around. He was standing close, closer than he'd ever stood before, and he was looking at her with the unhurried directness of someone who has stopped pretending not to see something. His expression was open in a way she rarely saw from him. The professional composure temporarily set aside. You listen, he said softly. Most people only pretend to. He was searching her face, looking for something. Finding it, maybe. The guilt expanded in her chest until it was occupying the same space as her heart. You did this. The voice in her head was quiet and absolute. You put the lace there. You sent the videos. You manufactured the trigger that set all of this in motion. And now this man, this patient, decent, careful man, is standing in front of you telling you that you're the person he trusts most. Sir. Min Jae. Min Jae. His name in her mouth felt strange and intimate at the same time. There is something I need to tell you. He frowned slightly. What is it? She set the glass down on the counter. She turned fully to face him. And then, slowly, quietly, completely, she broke open. The lingerie in your wardrobe. I put it there. The room went still. I put it there 2 days before Yura found it. I knew how she would react. I knew what she would assume. I planned it. Min Jae stared at her. She forced herself to continue, because starting and stopping was more cowardly than finishing. After that, I watched her. I'd already suspected she was hiding something. Phone calls she ended when staff came near, evenings she couldn't account for. I followed her. I saw her with another man. Then another night, in this house, while you were away, I recorded her. I followed her to a hotel and recorded her there too. The anonymous message. It wasn't a question. Yes. He took a breath, then another, and then the composure that had always defined him, that quiet, steady self-possession she had admired from the beginning, cracked. You what? His voice rose, and it filled the kitchen in a way she had never heard his voice fill a room before. You think destroying my engagement was your decision to make? I thought. You thought nothing. You manipulated everything. The lace, the suspicion, the fight, the evidence, all of it. And you're standing here telling me this was somehow about justice. She was lying to you. That was not your call. I know. I trusted you. His voice dropped, and somehow that was worse than the shouting. 3 words, delivered quietly, carrying more weight than all the anger that had come before them. Above everyone in this house, I trusted you. She felt the tears before she could stop them. She didn't wipe them away. She owed him this, the unguarded, undefended truth of how badly she had overstepped. I know, she said again. You're right. Everything you're feeling right now, you're right. Then why? He stared at her. Why would you do this? She looked at him directly. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. Because I love you. The kitchen went absolutely still. Min Jae's expression froze. He looked at her for a long moment in the way people look at something they've heard but haven't fully processed yet. What? I've been in love with you for months. She laughed softly through tears, embarrassed, exhausted, and past the point where pretending served any purpose. Quietly, from a distance, in a way I knew was impossible and did nothing about, except this. Except the worst possible version of nothing. She wiped her face. I told myself it was about you deserving the truth. And part of it was that, genuinely, she wasn't going to stop. You were going to marry someone who didn't love you and didn't intend to. That part was real. She straightened, composed herself with the visible effort of someone pulling themselves back together piece by piece. But the rest of it was about me, about wanting to protect you, about not being able to watch someone treat you carelessly when She stopped, Took a breath. I'll leave tomorrow morning. I've already packed. You'll never have to manage the discomfort of seeing me again. She bowed her head once, formally, with the dignity of someone who has surrendered everything and decided to do it cleanly. Good night. She walked past him, out of the kitchen, down the corridor, past the rooms she had cleaned 1,000 times, toward the staff quarters, where her bag was already packed on the bed. She was outside the iron gates with her suitcase when he came. She heard him before she saw him, running footsteps on the path, moving fast, the sound of someone who made a decision and moved on it without stopping to reconsider. Bridget! She turned. Min Jae was standing in the rain. He hadn't grabbed a coat. His hair was already damp, his shirt darkening at the shoulders. He looked, for the first time in the months she had known him, completely undone. You shouldn't be out here, she said quietly. He crossed the remaining distance between them. Stop close. I'm still angry. I know. What you did, the way you did it. I can't pretend that was okay. It wasn't. But, he stopped, looked at her with the careful attention she had spent months being invisible from. You saw something real. I know that now. Everything you showed me was true. And the way she spoke to me at the end, the ease of it, that wasn't a woman surprised by an accusation. That was a woman relieved to stop performing. Rain fell quietly between them. You were wrong in how you did it. You were right in what you showed me. A faint, complicated smile crossed her lips. That's a generous interpretation. It's an honest one. His eyes were searching her face again, the same searching she had felt in the library, in the kitchen, across every room where the distance between them had been slowly, silently collapsing. Do you still love me? The question arrived simply. No strategy. No cushioning. Just the direct, unguarded question of a man who has decided, for once, not to manage his feelings from a careful distance. She looked at him. Yes. He lifted his hand. Slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to step back, to redirect, to maintain the boundary she had spent an entire year standing on the correct side of. His fingers touched her face, brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek with a gentleness that felt like the beginning of something enormous. She didn't move. His eyes held hers for a long moment, the tension of months, the weight of everything that had happened between them, the specific, fragile beauty of two people standing in the rain having run out of reasons to pretend. Then don't leave. He leaned in slowly. She closed the remaining distance. The kiss was tentative for exactly 1 second, careful, questioning. Then it became something else. All of it. The months of quiet observation, the distance deliberately maintained, the words spoken and unspoken, the guilt and the truth and the wanting and the restraint, all of it released in a single long, breathless moment. His arm came around her and pulled her in, and she gripped the front of his shirt with both hands, and the rain fell steadily around them as though the city had agreed to leave them alone for this. When they finally pulled apart, neither of them moved far. Min Jae rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing. This isn't a solution, he murmured. This is a beginning. A complicated one. I know. There are things that need to be worked through. I know that too. I don't know yet if I can fully trust you. She pulled back slightly to look at him. That's fair. But something softened in his expression. Something settled. I know who I've been sitting alone in that house with every night for the past month. And I know how the house felt the moment you walked out of the gate. He looked at her. Empty. The rain continued to fall. Bridget exhaled slowly. Something that had been wound tight inside her chest for months, quietly, finally released. We'll figure it out, he said. Not a promise, not a guarantee, just an intention, offered honestly, between two people who had both been imperfect and had both told the truth eventually, standing outside an iron gate in Seoul at the beginning of something that had no clean origin story. She picked up her suitcase. He reached out and took it from her hand. They walked back through the gate together. Sometimes love doesn't begin with honesty. Sometimes it begins with a mistake. With something you did for reasons you couldn't fully admit to yourself until the damage was already done. But if two people are willing to look at the truth of each other, all of it, the embarrassing and the flawed and the quietly desperate, and choose to stay anyway, even a broken beginning can become something that lasts.